will have each of our authors introduce themselves to you, and then I have a few questions for them, and then we will open them up to questions from you. The challenge is going to be tonight, with so many people in here, we're going to end up using the mic. Where'd it go?
I have it.
Okay. Leah can go and we can form a line, maybe over to the side over here. When we get to that time, just so that you're not blocking anybody else's view, if you want to line up over here against the wall to ask questions of our panelists. That way, when there are this many people in here, if you try to do it from your seat, they can't hear you behind you. Okay, so in any case, we'll go ahead and get started with the gentleman on my left.
Hi, I'm Richard Kadrey, and I write the Sandman Slim series, and these Metrophage and Butcher Bird, and some other books, but mostly Sandman Slim. That's what I'm looking for.
My name is Jeanne Stein, and I write the Strong Vampire books. Louder. My name is Jeanne Stein, and I write the Strong Vampire books, and then under S.J. Harper, with my co-author Samantha Summersby, who's hiding in the corner over there. I write the Fallen Siren series.
Faith Hunter, and I write the Jane Yellowrock series and the Rogue Mage series and the upcoming Soulwood series.
I'm Carrie Vaughn. I write lots of different things, but I'm probably best known for my series about a werewolf named Kitty who hosts a talk radio advice show.
I'm Myke. I do military fantasy, so I did the Shadow Ops trilogy, which is Control Point, Fortress, Frontier, and Breach Zone, and my last novel, Gemini Cell, came out in January.
Hi, I'm Jim Butcher. I'm the author of the Dresden Files, the Codex Alera, and the steampunk series, The Cinder Spires.
My idea behind this panel was that you've got these characters, some of whom are thrust into positions that they don't necessarily dovetail with their personalities. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting right next to Richard and thinking about Sandman Slim, but anyway, that's my copy. Yeah, okay. I thought it was a nice prop. That is a nice prop. So, in any case, I just lost my train of thought, but it seems to me as though some of the characters are not people that you would naturally assume were going to be heroes, and that they weren't going to be giving things up in place of putting the good of others before themselves. Some of them do, and some of them are characters that have been made to do this. So that's actually my first question, is the sacrifice that your character ends up making, or sacrifices, are they self-imposed, or are they kind of inflicted on them by someone else, or saying, okay, this is what you have to do in order for, you have to do A in order for B or C to happen?
Well, in Sandman Slim, the first scene of the first book is a man crawling out of hell into the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, falling on a pile of burning leaves, and then rolling around for a while trying to put himself out. So he's a very reluctant hero at this point. The series, the way I've thought of it, I mean, I'm writing book 8 right now, is about the rehabilitation of a monster, in a sense. When he comes back from hell, he is out of his fucking mind. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to say that, sorry. I take that one word back, but not the rest of it. Oh, all right. So he really is genuinely a monster in the first book, but a funny one, so he gets away with cutting people's heads off. But what I wanted over the course of the series, I mean, the heroism comes out of not any sense of heroics or sacrifice, it's just the fact that despite himself, he becomes acclimated to humanity again. And he actually makes a terrible mistake of having friends, of finding a lover. And it's that basic sense of humanity creeping in despite all attempts to keep it out. And I think that's not necessarily even a hero. I think that's the process of growing up for anybody. The idea of empathy is part of growing up, and in my book, and I think a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about, it's that sense of something beyond the self that gets labeled heroism and maybe becomes heroic. Again, despite the character's best wishes.
Or inclinations.
I think the motives are different for both of the protagonists in my series, because my vampire series, Anna Strong was turned against her will into a vampire. So most of the things she has to do, she's doing because she now has a dual nature, both human and vampire. And she has to hide a lot of what she is from her human family, because she still does have family and friends. In the Fallen Siren series, our protagonist is one of the 3 original sirens that was cursed by Demeter. So she's constantly trying to, one of the curses, of course, is that she has to live as immortal until she redeems herself in the eyes of Demeter for letting Persephone, allowing Persephone to be captured by Hades. So she just continuously is living different lives, and in this particular life, she works for the FBI as a, I'm not speaking loud enough again. She works for the FBI in the Missing Persons and Kidnap Bureau. So she's constantly trying to redeem herself by saving others, other people, people in peril, with the hopes that someday she's going to be returned to Mount Olympus.
I don't think of Jeanne Yellowrock as a hero. I just don't think she knows how to say no. This was, when you asked the question, Carol, I'm going, I don't know how to answer this, but there was one scene in one of the first books that came to mind, and it's Jane's in a bar dancing, and someone is attacked in the ladies' room, and Jane's wearing a dress and dancing shoes, and she goes chasing after this insane rogue vampire in her party dress. And at the end of the evening, she's walking back down the streets of New Orleans in a bloody party dress carrying a severed vampire head. So it's not that she's reluctant or that she's a hero. I think she's just kind of dumb sometimes.
She just didn't know any better? Is that what you're saying? It was like, oh, vampire killer.
Scream, and it was like, oh, I have to go do this. And it doesn't matter that it ruined my beautiful new dress.
Yeah, she sacrificed the dress, if nothing else.
A beautiful dress.
Yeah, there are different kinds of heroes and different kinds of sacrifices.
That's right.
Yeah, I think so many of these characters, it's rarely presented as a choice. Here, be a hero or not be a hero. It's almost taken for granted that we are writing about these characters because they will always choose whatever the definition of heroic is in that particular circumstance. So I wrote the first Kitty book, Kitty in the Midnight Hour, and the only thing she's really saving in that one is herself. It's a book where this character is kind of starting out rock bottom, and she has to learn to stand up for herself and take care of herself, which, given the situation she's in, is a pretty heroic effort right there. As the series progresses, of course, her kind of, you can't hear me at all, because okay. Because it sounds loud to us up here. And there we go, okay. Okay, there we go. Yeah, a lot of us just aren't used to hearing ourselves like this. So yeah, in the first book, Kitty saves herself. And I think that's a pretty darn heroic effort. And as the series progresses, her sphere of what she is able to save expands. So she's saving her friends and her family, and then she's saving all the werewolves, and then she's saving everybody. But it's not conscious. It's not like she ever made a conscious decision that she was going to do this. One of my favorite authors is Robert McKinley, and she's kind of a master at the reluctant hero. And the way I like to think of her heroes, the way I put it is, this is the person who is standing in the right place at the right time. And they're the ones who are able to do it because nobody else is. And that's why we're writing the story about them.
Hero is kind of a loaded word for me. Those of you who know me know that like 15 minutes ago, I didn't look like this. I look like I pre-cut because I've been military and intelligence services all my career. And the funny experience you have when you're in the military is that everywhere you go, someone calls you a hero. I would ride the subway, people would call me a hero. I remember one time I went to a bed and breakfast, and I had my tack pack on. I wasn't even wearing a uniform. And the owner's like, I'm upgrading you to a suite. And I was like, thanks. Why? So, you're pack, you're overseas. You're a hero. And hey, I'll take the free upgrade, and that's great. And I understand that people mean well. But after a while, it really starts to piss you off. Because it's a stamp, right? And it obviates people from the responsibility of having to take 5 minutes to get to know you. Maybe I am a hero, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a serial killer. Maybe I was a thief when I was over there. You'll never know because you didn't ask. You just stamped hero on whatever you saw, and then that's that. You're a good citizen, right? And I'm not the only person who felt that way. And so when I set out to write, because my stories are fundamentally and profoundly military, I wasn't going to write that guy. Because we all know what that guy looks like, right? And one of the things that fiction, good fiction, and science fiction and fantasy in particular are supposed to do is push the back out of that envelope. And that was one thing I sought to do. So I worked really hard to make my hero, who I'll refer to as my protagonist, as jacked up as any human being I ever met. And what heroism comes out of the story, he comes to it the same way all of us do, by screwing up and blundering to it. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm assuming, look, it's DragonCon, right? We all grew up getting our asses kicked, not getting dates. I played D&D in my mom's basement to an age I'm kind of ashamed to admit. And some of you bore witness to me texting my mother at the beginning of this.
She answered.
Right. No, not yet. She will. So I've never felt like that. And one of the things I always get pissed off about, especially in fantasy, is that makes it unrelatable to me. It's one of the things I'm very excited about in the current wave of grimdark fantasy, is that the biggest character flaw Frodo Baggins has is an excess of earnestness. I much prefer Jaime Lannister, right, or Rick Grimes, because these are horrible, horrible, horrible people just like me.
As far as sacrifice goes for Dustin and what has he done himself and what has been thrust upon him, I think it was thrust upon you. I'm not sure it's a sacrifice. I think that's just sort of something that's been done to you. But that being said, he's a character who was born with access to more power than regular people. And when you put that together with, he read too much Spider-Man when he was young, he feels he has an obligation to do something at least marginally helpful with that power. And I think if it was up to him, he would be happy to just find people's lost wedding rings and car keys and stuff like that. But because he is who he is, and because he lips off to people, also because he read too much Spider-Man when he was young, he finds himself in these other situations. As far as everything else goes, though, he's very good at bringing everything else upon himself. Right? Basically, almost everything he suffered because he made a bad call, or because he made the wrong decision. Or sometimes he suffers because he made the right decision, and that's what life is a lot of the time. Sometimes you suffer for doing the right thing, and sometimes there is no right thing, and you just gotta do something. So I mean, as far as sacrifice goes, that's kind of where I come from. I've seen a bunch of different kinds over the years, mostly by pretty decent people. sometimes by people who just weren't all that bright. But it's always stuff that you just got to look at it and say, you know why you're bleeding from the throat right now? Well, I was running with my eyes closed. And it's like, yeah, you were running with your eyes closed and ran into a mailbox. It's one of those choices maybe you should think about. You should review that one in the future, just to check. But,
So the moral of the story is don't run with your eyes closed, right?
yeah, on that particular one, yeah.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he's got a great scar to show the girls.
And in fiction, don't run with your eyes closed is strangely easier said than done in some cases.
Oh, yeah, yeah. What is the single biggest sacrifice that one of your characters has made, whether it's either associated with what it is that they do, or if it's associated with something in their personal lives?
I think for me, it's getting involved in other people's lives. For Sandman Slim, James Stark, to admit that there are other people who are worth his time was a big sacrifice in itself, and he fell into it. It was nothing he was looking for, but I think it's that a lot of it's that growing up process, and again, we come back to the word empathy. Becoming human was his sacrifice, because it was so much easier when he started out, when every response to everything was to kill somebody. It's a really simple way to live, and that's how my character starts out. It's learning, maybe we shouldn't just kill everybody, maybe just a handful of people, right away. So I think, discovering the humanity in other people, and reluctantly discovering the humanity in himself.
I think for Anna Strong, it's not so much a sacrifice that she's making, because she doesn't have any choice of what she's doing. And actually with both of my protagonists, there isn't, they don't have a choice. In the sacrifices that they make, as far as Anna Strong is concerned, it's the sacrifice that she has to conceal what she is from her family. And for Emma, it's that she can never find true love or true happiness, because that's part of the curse that Demeter has placed on her. So her sacrifice is that if she finds herself becoming attached to someone, she has to back away, because it won't end well for the person that she's involved with.
I think that Jane's worst sacrifice, most difficult sacrifice, is the sacrifice of forgiveness. She's done a lot of things that she looks back and wishes she hadn't. She's done a lot of things that she didn't know were bad at the time or wrong at the time. And that goes all the way back to when she was 5 years old. So learning to forgive herself and then learning to forgive people who have hurt her is really hard, and is life-changing for her. It changes all of her relationships. So the sacrifice of doing her job, that's not such a big deal. But the sacrifice of growing through the pain, that's a big deal.
So I've had 3 other answers to think of my answer, and I'm still mulling it, because I've not necessarily thought about the character in terms of sacrifice. And part of that is I started the character out with nothing. She was rock bottom when we started out. And she earned things. As the series went on, she achieved a lot and earned a lot, and that was kind of a conscious decision on my part about how I wanted to frame the entire series. So in terms of sacrifice, the longer the series goes on, the more she has to lose, and the more that failure will hurt. And in that sense, raising the stakes itself is a sacrifice, because the sacrifice for her is not being able to not care anymore, if that makes any sense. She can't walk away. There comes a point where she will lose too much, and so that the luxury of apathy, which is not, and that's why it's a weird way to frame it, but that ends up being what she doesn't have at the end of the series that she had at the start, was the ability to just not care and walk away. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I see the character working within the story there. So I'll leave it at that.
For me, it's easy. It's membership, institutional membership. And once again, I'm talking about military and intelligence circles. So I don't know if any of you in the audience have ever held a security clearance or earned one. Good, sir, you put your hand up. You're going to be fired from your day job as soon as you get out of here. And it's that we call it your tickets in the industry, because you go through this incredibly invasive process of scrutiny. And you give up a lot of free speech freedoms, and you give up a lot of privacy freedoms. But you then get a job for life, and it's usually a high-paying one. But more importantly, you get incredible institutional acclaim, that the government of the United States puts its weight behind you. And it's the same thing I was talking about before. When you put on a uniform, when people find out you work in intelligence, there's a feeling you get that the whole world is supportive of you and happy with you and grateful to you. And that's a really tough thing to give up. A really tough thing to give up. Because we all want to be loved and we all want to be praised by the people around us. So what do you do when you find yourself ethically at odds with this institution that is now your living? And it's not only your living, but it's a piece of your identity, right? Because being a member of a service is about more than just a job, it's a life, right? We always used to say, I had, the Coast Guard on my chest and my name. I said I had my family name and my family name. And I wasn't kidding, right? So what do you do when you have to give that up? And now I work in law enforcement. Tough time to be in law enforcement, huh? People don't exactly have a great opinion of the police, and they're right not to. So these are all themes I wanted to explore. So I have a character who's hip deep in the Army, and the Army is his life. And I even made him deliberately broken away from his family. I made him a black guy in Vermont because I wanted him to be completely out of sorts. Not in the south side of Chicago. I want him to be in a place where he feels completely alone. And the Army has become his home. And now he's got a direct conflict between the institution and where he has to go in his life. And that is a tremendous sacrifice, and one that's a theme throughout all my books.
For Dresden, increasingly what he has given up as the series has gone on is his ability to just live a peaceful life free of psychotics who want him dead, or incredibly messed up people who need his help. As he keeps going, as he keeps making choices throughout the series, he makes a number of enemies. He earns the enmity, the political enmity of people within the institution that's supposed to be supporting him, and in general, just sort of walks further and further out on a plank as the series has progressed. And really, that would be. I live a pretty quiet life. I'm mostly a hermit. I'm at home, I work on my books, I hang out with my dog, we go on walks. I do pretty boring stuff, really, most of the time. And I like that. That's good. That's a good life. But Dresden, he continually has to give this up more and more. He rarely gets a day where he can sit down and read a book now. He's got to be too busy preparing for the future when the next, apocalypse is going to happen. And he's going to have to scramble to, just to come out of it in one piece on the other side. So I think it's that ability to have that quiet life that he's lost the most of. Although there have been more, like direct sacrifices, like literal sacrifices. Too soon. Yeah. Too soon, sorry. I'll shut up.
I have a question. Is apocalypse trademarked?
I do not think so, and you are welcome to it.
Hopefully that's the new term. Yeah, it'll be in the next Yellow Rock book.
No. There's really no gasms in it.
Guaranteed death.
Well, that's a sacrifice.
Do you think that heroism involves sacrifice, do you think that that is part of the requirement of it? And do you think that one of your heroes or heroines actually qualifies as a hero or heroine?
Okay, we'll start with you.
I think that largely heroism is about making a choice where you put the good of somebody else ahead of your own good. And at the end of the day, that's really what defines it. And it's not always a big dramatic thing, you know, as much as it is just something that is necessary. You know, your child needs you to look out for them. And the person that you were before that child came along, you kind of have to archive that person a bit. Because you've got to be somebody else, you know, when there's this tiny, irrational human being who is suddenly, you know, living in your space. Believe me, I did that, and those people, they are not reasonable. Those little short people, it takes a long time before they're reasonable, and usually, you know, they're only reasonable because you can take the Xbox away. You've got to be able to get to that level of negotiating skill with it before you've got really a chance to deal with them on a rational level. Up until then, you have no idea the kind of ridiculous nonsense you'll be saying to this little person, so that you can get through the day. But anyway, fundamentally, that's what heroism is. It's putting someone else's good ahead of your own and taking action to make sure it happens. And sometimes that does involve it really, I guess it probably always involves some kind of sacrifice, because your self-interest is being sacrificed for somebody else's good.
Wow, this is a tough one. I think that Jim nailed it, and I'll put it in a military context because I do everything in a military context. Is when I look at why people are considered heroes, it is always because they've done something for a larger group of people outside of themselves. Now, sometimes that can happen in the case of self-interest. So, for example, when Steve Jobs died, do you remember like the national level of mourning over this guy? Like, this was not someone who stepped out in front of a shield wall and took an arrow so that his comrades could get away. He was a businessman, right? This guy, but yet he brought revolutions to our life. I think Elon Musk is a hero. I think he's changing the way we live, and will continue to change the way we live. And he's damn well compensated for changing the way we live. And there are other heroes. Like if you were British, you'd probably grow up thinking that Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, was a hero. This is a privileged anti-Semitic aristocrat who never had to worry about anything a day in his life. And he also saved Britain, absolutely. And those two things coexist simultaneously. Is it a sacrifice? Let's enjoy this musical interlude while we consider it. I'm pretty proud of that.
And you start naming people who you consider heroes, and the names that popped into my head were like Jane Goodall and Sally Ride. Once again, heroism takes so many different forms and it's so many different contexts, and both of those people are heroes to me, not necessarily because they were ever in danger, but because they did something that no one else had ever done before. They made us think in a way that no one else had made us think before. And those are also really important things. And I'm betting if you ask them, or if you go back into their writings, it's not a choice they ever made in those terms. It's not like they sat down and said, I'm going to be a hero today. They had something that was so important to them that they were willing to put themselves in the spotlight and willing to put themselves in a place where they would be judged in ways that a lot of us are not willing to do. But that's what changes the world. That's what makes really amazing things happen. In terms of characters, I think it works best when we don't actually see that decision process. It's something that you really only see in hindsight, and the characters themselves are kind of working so hard just to stay alive, especially in our type of writing, that the issue of heroism is something that is imposed on them from without, rather than something that they choose for themselves. And part of that is just the nature of fiction. We call them heroes because they're the stars of the books, and if they weren't having these really amazing things happen to them, we wouldn't be writing about them, theoretically, but that's some kind of meta-narrative, presumptive stuff that I'm not sure it even bears mentioning at that point, but it very rarely seems presented as a choice to a lot of, real-life people or characters.
I'm having trouble with this one because I just don't see my characters as heroes from exactly what you just said. They don't start out that way. They start out people just with a job or thrown into something and they're trying to make do. They're trying to get through things. And the closest I can come to a hero who really sacrificed in anything I've ever written was the Thorn St. Croix books, where if Thorn is outed, she's dead, and in the most unpleasant fashion. But she's willing to risk that because her stepdaughter says, Daddy's missing. And she goes after to save Daddy, who is no longer her husband. And to me, that was a really emotional moment for me as a writer. And so that was a sacrifice. It was a sacrifice to write it, and it was a sacrifice to the character.
I guess I don't really believe that any hero thinks about the fact that he might be making a sacrifice. I think true heroism comes when someone does something unselfishly without thinking. And right now, what popped into my mind were the three men that stopped that carnage. Yes,
U.S. Marines.
U.S. Marines. I don't really think that they said to themselves, "Okay, we may be making a sacrifice here." They saw something that needed to be done, and they did it. The people that flew the plane into the field in Pennsylvania during that terrible time in our country. I don't believe any of those, and again, the military, let's roll, I don't believe anyone, character in fiction or in real life, actually compares heroism to sacrifice. I just think they see something that needs to be done, whether it's to protect their family, whether it's to protect a total stranger, and they just act because they're heroic. They would probably never say that. They probably would never classify themselves as heroes. But by doing whatever action that they've done, they are the true heroes.
Yeah, they all said smart stuff, and I just screwed up at this point. So I'll let that one go.
So is your answer ditto?
Sure.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Now, at this time, if you have some questions you would like to ask of the panel, you can go over here with Leah, who has the mic. And after we get about 5 people over there,
You can come
we
around.
can, there's not a whole lot of space to do that.
Don't be shy, man.
Yeah.
Go.
And while we're letting folks line up, who can you think of that you would consider to be a heroic figure in fiction that maybe your character could emulate, or just anybody that you feel as though is kind of a benchmark for that type of behavior?
They come up with
Anyway?
I'm
Apparently I'm not supposed, okay.
No,
Anybody who wants to take it, let's do that. Go for it, Myke.
Well, it's got to be Tyrion Lannister. No, seriously. I love the heroes I use. My name is. I know my name.
Yes, you Mike's fine.
So no, I love. Look, this is the way anything gets done. In OCS, we used to do this. They used to be like, hey, we're going to give you a test car. Some of you probably don't know about that. And they, I got an hour study, it's fine. You go eat, and you come back to your room, and they toss your room. Well, now you got to clean it up. And they got you out in the hallway doing push-ups or whatever. By the time you get everything done, you have 10 minutes to study. right? How am I gonna get this done? I don't know. And you just kind of do it, right? And the thing I love about Tyrion is that he's already on the has a huge disadvantage because he's grown up with dwarfism. He's rejected by his family, and he's keeps being thrust into these positions of command where he has no real options, and yet constantly finds a way. And the one thing he never does is go, all right, whatever, and throw up his hands and lie down, right? And trips his way through, not always to great success, but to staying in the fight, and staying in the fight in a significant way, despite every disadvantage. And I would like to point out, despite disadvantages that would probably make all of us go, there's just no chance, right? I think about that all the time, you know, every time I'm feeling like a task is too great for me to. And the thing that's so funny is I'm thinking about someone who doesn't exist, and all the things that he has not actually ever done. And they're inspiring me to, like, I don't know, get up and go to the gym or something like that.
So Kitty, over the course of the series, actually has two pictures that she ends up hanging on her bulletin board at work, and one of them is General William Sherman, who we discover altered history a little bit. He decided that he was a werewolf.
Which explains a lot, yeah.
If you look at his picture, also all the other like Union Civil War generals, they're very Victorian era, straight-laced with the starched collar and the very nicely trimmed beards and the very serious expressions. And then you get to Sherman, and his hair's like ruffled, and he's got like this 5-day-old beard, and his collar's open, and his expression is totally like, screw you, man. And I'm like, oh my god, that guy's a werewolf. And so because I write fiction, I did that. And the other one is a statue called the Capitoline Wolf, which is the idea of it dates back to Rome, and it's the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. And in those cases specifically, Kitty was looking for werewolf role models throughout history. That became kind of one of her pet things. Is you know, once she discovered how pervasive the supernatural was in her world, she thought, well, this isn't just happening to me. This has always been like this. So who are the people? And so that's been a fun project, but you know, both for me from the research standpoint, because like many writers, I can't stop researching. But then I was able to give those, you know, who would be her heroes, and she would look for werewolves. Who are the secret werewolves in history, and how interesting is that? And then she suddenly has role models for not just how to be a person, but how to be a werewolf, and that ended up being kind of important.
Sherman, I love it. Okay, Leah?
Oh, okay. Hello, this is for the panel, whoever wants to accept it. Just, you know, so far what I've gleaned from the panel is that you all consider sacrifice less of a choice and more of a conflict point to show the core of a character, which I guess is why I find your character so endearing. But I'm wondering, like, how you come up with those conflict points and go like, oh, let's shove our character through this torture machine, and kind of figure out, like, you know, this is how we're going to show the guts of our character and show who they are. That's my question.
So ultimately, practice. We just keep doing it to characters over and over, and torturing your characters is really more or less how you break into the industry. Once you're able to sufficiently torture your character, then you're able to get a book published. And then after that, it's just, you know, it's sort of an issue of learning how to do it more and more artistically and dramatically.
And shockingly and surprisingly.
Yes. For me, excellent practice was being a dungeon master. Because I would do that to my characters, my PCs, and I would cliffhang every episode at the end of the session, and make them scream at me for stopping it right there, and so on. So we always had a good place to start, and we never had to remind everybody where we were, and that kind of thing. But yeah, these are all aspects of storytelling that transfer over to a bunch of different other things. But yeah, largely practice.
The gentleman who asked the question, are you, and I'm sorry to put you in the spotlight, are you an aspiring writer?
No, I'm a video game designer.
Cool. Well then, for those of you in the audience who are aspiring writers, that is a magnificent question. And the reason it is a magnificent question is because the focus is on the character and nothing else. And so many people, when they start writing, think about everything
other than what you're thinking about, which is the most important thing in stories, because characters, in my opinion, the thing that matters. You could write a story with the most incredible plot in the world and lousy characters, and it's going to stink. You could write, and all of the stories that we love, Orange is the New Black, Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, all of them, what are they? They're basically characters running around bumping into each other, and the plots are almost superfluous. So I just want to call out the question itself as a great question, and the kind of question I don't get enough on writing panels. And I'm not going to answer it.
You start out with broken characters. You don't start out with characters who are Superman. You start out with characters who need to grow somewhere, and you write a book that challenges those weaknesses and those problems, and then you end up with a character who grows with each book. And if you have character that's broken, then you have everywhere you can go.
I think it's also finding out what the character cares about. I mean, you just find, what do they love, what do they care about? Just stick it to them. You just put the knife right where they love something. And that's the thing about practice. When you start out, you don't want to be that hard on your characters, and the more you go along, it's like, I'm going to fuck this guy up.
You find out what they really want and do everything you can to keep them
Yeah,
away from
You don't have to be a sadist to be a writer, but...
Okay.
My question is, most of the urban fantasy I've read, yours included, has the protagonist based in sort of a home city or a home setting of some kind. And a lot of times it seems like there's a parallel between some of the traits of the personality of the protagonist and some of the traits of the city or the setting that you placed them in. And I'm wondering, I know many of you have lived in the cities or the settings that you do put them in, how much your experiences in those places influenced the personalities of your characters, and how much your characters influenced how you portrayed the cities or places in your books.
We're doing a panel on this at 11:30 on Sunday as well. Construction settings in urban fantasy. So I'm going to take notes so that I can settle this down.
I was just going to say that it influenced me a lot, because when I was coming up with my vampire world, my setting was San Diego, and I couldn't imagine anybody living in San Diego that couldn't go out in the sun. So I had my vampires had adjusted to sunlight over the centuries. So yes, where I placed my story had a lot to do with how I built my world.
For me, setting is character. Oops. For me, setting is character. It should be as deeply realized and as deeply developed as the character is. And if it's not, then there's a sort of immediacy that's missing from a story. It's just, the character, Jeanne doesn't fit in with New Orleans at all. She's a mountain girl. But she can get into trouble in New Orleans just as easily as she could in the mountains.
So my very first draft of the first book, I didn't name the city. I wanted it. I thought, as writers working on their early novels often do, that I was being clever and that it would be like every town, and so anybody would be able to sort of read it and see their own town there. And the editor said, no, you really, this is contemporary fantasy. You have to anchor it in the now. So you have to name the city. You have to give it an actual place. And she was exactly right. And the place that I gave it was Denver, just because that was the big city that I am most familiar with. I don't live in Denver, but I live quite near to Denver. And it turns out that Denver is a perfect city for werewolves. And this is not something I would have thought about. It's a city, it's as urban and interesting a city as you could wish for. And an hour in any direction, you are in wilderness. Unlike pretty much any other urban sprawl area you can name in the country. So I got the best of both worlds. And it was not something I anticipated, but it was something I absolutely used often in the books.
You guys are nailing the questions tonight. I really wish that all panel audiences had these kinds of questions. It's normally, where do you Where do you get your ideas?
That's because the urban fantasy track attendees are the best.
This is also a great question, and I love the point that you said that setting is character. And the best example of that I can give is the sort of holy grail of urban fantasy, which is Charlotte Harris's Stackhouse novels. Bon Louisiana is almost a character in and of itself, and I can't imagine, you couldn't put Sookie Stackhouse in Maine, you know, I mean, like, just get on a plane and go back to Bon like, it doesn't fit. If you guys want great examples, this is the awesome thing about science fiction conventions is we're all nerds, so we just sit around and go tell each other what's awesome. So what's awesome is China Mieville, and he is all about making cities breathe, particularly London. And the best example of that, of course, and he also has fictional cities too that do this, if you want to see this done well. The City in the City is amazing. And the other, which by the way is being made into a TV show by BBC, so if you'll all join me in the chant of please don't fuck it up. But the other good example I want to throw out is not commonly thought of as urban fantasy is Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, the first book being His Majesty's Dragon. But the reason I want to bring that up, it's amazing. It's the Napoleonic Wars with an aerial corps mounted on dragons. And the reason I want to bring it up is that what she does is she's like, all right, here's how it is in Britain. And then she thinks, all right, well, I did that. And then she goes on for another 6 books. Africa, China, Japan, Australia, and in each one of these places she has to make the personalities of the dragons, the societies that revolve around them, match localities, match regions, match disparate cultures, and while that's bigger than specific cities in your case, it's such an amazing example of that done right, that it's funny, the best way to answer your question is to read the people that do it best, and I think those are the best examples I can think of. Vote for me.
Okay, next question.
Yes, the question I wanted to ask was, what is the character building for themselves in these stories? And why do you take so much joy in tearing that away from them?
See, the thing is I get asked a question similar to that a lot, and why do you enjoy torturing your characters so much? And the answer is I don't enjoy torturing my characters. I enjoy torturing my readers. It's just that my characters are how I get to you. They're the ones who, if I'm doing my job right and I do something horrible to my character, you'll cry. That's so cool. But at the same time, that's kind of what you will lay your money down for, is a story that is going to make you laugh when there's nothing funny that happened, because I'm writing words about something that didn't happen, but I can still get you to laugh, or cry, or cheer for a character, and that's. That's a really special kind of magic. I really dig that, and apparently the audience kind of likes it too. That's sort of my job is to do that. So me torturing my characters is all about me getting to you, because that's what you pay me for.
There's also the fundamental thing of there's nothing going on if you're not torturing your characters. I mean, it's just baseline. If everybody's having a good time and being nice, it's just lunch with mom, depending on your mom.
Good back yet?
And I'll say you were at the panel where Myke flushed.
Oh, that is something to remember. Does anybody else want to answer that? Not about Mike's mom.
So I once got an email from a reader asking if I was ever afraid of making Kitty too happy. And so I started thinking about, especially in terms of this panel, thinking about happiness and sacrifice, and happiness and suffering together, and realizing that those things actually aren't necessarily dependent on each other. And I think what this reader was anticipating, was worried about, having kind of expecting me to tear everything away, Because like I said a little earlier, for me the series was about Kitty achieving things and Kitty getting better and Kitty getting more powerful. And so naturally, I think he thought I was going to take it all away at some point. And it turns out I wasn't actually worried about that at all, because the more professional acclaim she got, and the more the stronger her relationship was, the more she has to lose. And that's kind of an inverse kind of tension. It's not the tension of seeing horrible things happen, but it's that tension of being afraid that everything's going to go away. And in some ways, that it's a different kind of tension, but I think it can be equally effective. So I didn't really think of it in terms of like her happiness versus sacrifice versus suffering versus all of that. It's how invested is the reader in the character, and what can you do to make them worry about the character?
That's apparently plenty, given the questions we're getting. You guys are very good at it.
I think we have to, at this juncture, we have to throw out a film quote. Please get this. Which is the best answer to your question is, life is pain, Your Highness.
No touching.
So I had a question, which would be, for everybody's characters which have such impact on their series, could you think of a single character that had a sacrifice that they didn't make, which they regret, a sacrifice that they wish they'd made?
We're writing our own books, which is really hard. It's really, really hard.
Get a free toaster.
He's coming.
That's right, you waited getting a panel of authors to not say anything.
Follow-up will be a math problem.
There was a gentleman here that had a question before, yes. And I'll repeat it so everybody can hear.
Ouch.
Actually, mine was specifically for Jim. Sorry, you're all wonderful. But when I heard about this panel, I was actually listening to the short story collection about Bigfoot on my drive out here. And the relationship between Erwin and Connie has a striking resemblance to Thomas and Justine. But the sacrifice that goes along with Thomas and Justine is very profound. I mean, like right up there with like literal sacrifice.
Thomas and Justine is what we're talking about. Sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera.
Is the sacrifice for Erwin and Connie on the way, or I don't know, because the fact that she can still touch him and she loves him very much, and the love is very mutual.
Well, they got a happily ever after, and now they're going to go off stage and not do anything anyhow. And again, because they got a happy ending. That's boring. Harry doesn't really get to deal too much in happy endings, for the most part. Occasionally, he pulls somebody out of the fire and gets to dust them off and say, "Go on your way and be less stupid next time." But he really doesn't deal a whole lot in happy endings. I don't know if he's actually going to get a happy ending. We'll have to see how the end of the story is going to play out. I'm not quite sure about that yet. I kind of know what the big explosion will be at the end, but not where all the pieces are going to fall out. So I'm kind of interested to find that out, which is why I keep writing. So.
He's still in college, right?
Carol,
Oh no, he's done that.
Grad school?
No.
Carol,
He's
do we have time for one more?
I'm free and
Do we
clear.
have time for one more?
Oh.
What's the question?
When do they know what now? They say, okay, we can do one very quickly. I'm sorry.
Really quick, you build these wonderful stories for us and build these wonderful characters. At what point do you know it's time to end a series, and how do you bring it to an end? It kind of flows right into Jim's most recent statement. But for everybody, how do you end it?
Big.
You did notice he said explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Dresden Files from the beginning were planned to be about 20 of the case books like we've had so far, and then a big apocalyptic trilogy at the end, with fleets and explosions and nukes and kaiju and all kinds of awesomeness that I want to get to, and I've been building towards it as we've been going, and and Dresden keeps running into larger and larger things, and he keeps powering up, and everybody's worried, aren't you worried about giving Dresden too much power? And I'm like, no, I know he's fighting next week. So, basically, I hand him just enough strength to keep him wriggling on the hook until we get to the end and see how things fall out. So.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I actually just ended my series. Came out a month ago. And I warned people ahead of time that the last book was going to be called Kitty Saves the World. And she does. That
Spoiler.
Well, I think I can say that much. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is a spoiler. Maybe I really did kill everybody off in the end. That would surprise people, wouldn't it? And kind of like Jim was saying, I had a plan. When I realized, I did not plan this to be a long series when I started out, because I didn't actually believe anybody would read the first book, and then they did, and I was very surprised. Very grateful, by the way, so thank you everyone who picked up that first book, because it meant I got to write 13 more, which was great. But round about book 4, I realized I was going to have to build in an arc to start pulling me through the books, to start kind of tying all the books together. So I threw in a big bad guy, threw in the arc, the vampire long game. Which meant once you do that, once there's an arc, I am a big believer in endings. I'm a big believer in closure. And so at that point, it meant the series was heading towards something. And it was very satisfying to write, because I'd sort of been thinking of these scenes the whole way along. But it does require answering a bunch of questions like, what are my loose ends? Who's going to live and who's going to die? Who's actually going to participate in the big finale, as it were, and making sure, I wanted to call it Kitty Saves the World before I actually knew what was going to happen exactly. So at that point, the plot had to match the title. It really had to live up to that, and I think I found a way to do it, and it was a lot of fun to write. And the feedback on it has been great. It's currently my best reviewed book on Amazon, so I'm going to pat myself on the back for that it stuck the landing, and I think I'm pretty happy about that. It's very satisfying.
Jim and I have the same editor at Ace Rock, Ann Sowards, and she's amazing. Hugo nominated Ann Sowards. She and both Jim and other authors, Jack Campbell, Patty Briggs, and Ann Edits, have had tremendous success really making you guys fall in love with one protagonist and following that protagonist through many, many adventures. And it gives them really time to dig into the character. It's a really good way to write. But I have been exercising incredibly poor judgment for 41 years. And it is very important. Consistency is extremely important. So when I handed in my second book to Anne, the protagonist of the first book was Oscar Britton. She was like, this is not about Oscar Britton, this is somebody else. And I was like, yeah, no, it's okay. It's going to be a really good book. And then, so she took that book, and then I handed in the third book, and she was like, this is a totally different main character from the last 2 books. And I was like, no, it's really fine. And now the 6th book I'm going to be handing in, at this point, Anne's just like, Myke, do whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is that, for me, it's an issue of attention span and excitement about the work. And that you, as a writer, have to be into what you're writing. And my squirrel, shiny thing over there, attention span and method of creativity, both enfranchises me with some audiences and also limits me. But I have to be cognizant of that and writing to that. Because otherwise I'm not going to be excited about what I'm writing, and it's not going to be my best work.
This might be difficult for you. We do have a giveaway. If you can look at it's going to be the top of your right chair leg. It's going to be a green sticker, and it says 75 cents.
That's what I get for not sitting in the chair.
Yeah, I got it.
Got it? Okay, raise your hand. Have you ever read Dead Witch Walking, Kim Harrison? Okay, you got a training score. Okay, let's give them a hand, please. You have been. Thank you so very much for being here tonight.
Very good question.
Yay!